All right, and I'm going to hit start right now.
Hi, I want to welcome you if you're just logging on. We're going to wait a few minutes, make sure everybody has a chance to get on, but I do want to welcome you. The chat is open. We are always interested if people are Zooming in from various places around the country, around the world, in Portland. If you want to say hello, please use the chat and do that. We'd love to hear from you while we're waiting for everyone to log on.
I'm just curious, are there people logging in from overseas?
Well, if you're logging in from overseas, put it in the chat. We'd love to know.
Because I guess Amber was saying that you got a lot of people. I wasn't sure whether it was just people in the US or people from overseas. So yeah, I guess ask people to raise their hand if they're logging in from some other country.
Exactly. Oh, here's someone saying hello. Hi, if you're just logging on, I want to welcome you to tonight's program. We're going to take just a couple of minutes more and make sure everyone has a chance to log on. Our chat is open. You're welcome to put where you're from in the chat if you like. We love that people are from Portland. Only Portland. That's okay. We love Portland. That's where we are. So thank you.
Yeah, somebody just wrote, I'm only from Portland. I mean, we're not minimizing Portland.
We're all, the best of us are from Portland.
There you go. Marilyn Mayo from New York City.
There you go. Oh,
Great. Hey, Marilyn.
Hi, if you're just logging on, we're going to give it just one more minute before we start. I want to welcome everyone. We are just going to make sure everyone has a chance to enter. I've been saying that you're welcome to use the chat. Tell us where you're from. Thank you.
I'm seeing somebody's logging in from Astoria, Oregon. I wonder if there's lots of Greeks there too, like there are in New York.
How are we doing?
There's probably an Astoria in every state.
You think so? Probably.
All right, I think we will get started in the interests of time. I want to welcome everyone. I know some people are still logging in, but I'll just go ahead with my introductory comments. I want to say a good evening and a welcome to everyone. I'm Judy Margles. I'm the director at the Oregon Jewish Museum and Center for Holocaust Education. You can't see my colleague, Gail Mandel. She's the white square on the screen. Gail, our deputy director, is kindly here this evening to help us with tech issues. I am sure we won't have any. First, want to extend my gratitude to our program co-sponsors, the Never Again Coalition and the Holocaust and Genocide Studies program at Portland State University. These are two worthy entities with whom we partner a lot every year, and we're just so grateful to have them as part of this program. All of our virtual programming, including this event, recordings of our past events, are without charge. We're always grateful for any donation you might be able to make to help us or any of our partner organizations. Today is International Holocaust Remembrance Day. Exactly 16 years ago to this day, the United Nations General Assembly adopted Resolution 60/7 as a day to mark the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau. And it is meant also to honor the memory of the 6 million Jewish victims of the Holocaust and the millions of other victims of Nazi atrocity. Drawing from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the resolution condemns all forms of, quote, religious intolerance, incitement, harassment, or violence against persons or communities based on ethnic origin or religious belief throughout the world. Yet here we are, 76 years after the end of the Second World War, when awareness of the Holocaust is alarmingly low in many parts of the world, and, if I may say, shockingly low in the United States. Even more disturbing is the percentage of people who know about the Holocaust but think that it is either a myth or that the number of Jews who died has been greatly exaggerated. In this country, against the backdrop of the dual pandemics of COVID-19 and racial injustice, now more than ever, we need to stand in solidarity against all forms of hate. At the heart of our work at the Oregon Jewish Museum and Center for Holocaust Education, we strive to make connections between past and present, to elicit self-reflection on the problems threatening our society and the roles we are called upon to play in working together towards some sort of reconciliation. This same resolution that created International Holocaust Remembrance Day also encourages the development of educational programs to remember the Holocaust and to prevent further genocide. And that brings us to this evening's program. I'm so grateful to be here with our 4 guests, all valiantly staying up late on the East Coast to participate, and each of whom played an extremely important role in the making of the film Trezoros, The Lost Jews of Kastoria. Please join me in welcoming Larry Confino, and you might just wave. Larry Confino, director, producer, Lawrence Russo, the director, Dr. Joe Halio, who served on the film as a consultant on Sephardic history, and Andrea Grass, who provided important archival photos and film to the project through her family. So through our discussion this evening, you're going to have an opportunity to learn more about the critical roles that each of our guests this evening provided to the film. The format will be, I'm just going to engage everyone in a few questions, a conversation. Our Q&A is open. You are absolutely welcome to put your own questions. I'll ask that you put your questions in the Q&A rather than the chat. That just makes it easier for us to follow where the questions are coming from. And I think we're looking forward to a very robust discussion. So welcome all of you. Thank you so much, as I said, for being here at an extremely late hour on the East Coast. So I'd like to first turn to Larry Rousseau, if I might, and if you would just, talk to us a little bit about your family and why it was so important for this story to be told.
When you're a kid, you don't know exactly what your parents' history was. And as I grew older and learned, they never spoke about it. They never told me what it was. It was just, I used to see the number on their arm, and I used to ask them what it was, and they would just say a bad man put it there. It was their telephone number. And as I got older, junior high school, you learn about World War II. I was able to put 2 and 2 together that the tattoos on their arms were because they went through concentration camp. And when I learned what that history was and how my grandparents passed away, that my parents had pictures of both of their parents on their dresser table in their bedroom. And I used to look at those pictures knowing how they passed away. And I just felt a responsibility to tell that story. And I always wanted to express that there was this heritage, there was this culture that was destroyed, never to be seen again. And the story I always tell is people would ask me, where are your parents from? So they're from Greece, and they say, oh, I thought you said you were Jewish. I said, yeah, I'm Jewish, and they were from Greece. They were Jews in Greece. So the part of it was to people should know that these people existed.
Thank you. And while I've got you, Larry, why don't you, I think everybody who's participating this evening has seen the film. So say who your family members are so people can make the connection with the film.
I guess most people would recognize Lena Russo, who's in the picture. So that's my mom. And I have 2 older brothers, and my father's Maurice Rousseau, who she ended up getting married to. And Calef is my grandfather. Calef and Allegra, they're my mother's parents.
Wonderful.
And Benny.
That's right, of course. And Benny is my uncle.
Right. Wonderful. Thank you. I think it would be really useful for all of us to understand a little bit more about what Kastoria was like before the Nazi invasion in 1941. And Joe, would you help us a little bit with the context and the background? Give us a little history lesson.
Sure. Kastoria is it's a small town in Greece. At the time of the Second World War, there were probably about a little over 3,000 people in Kastoria, in the town. It's a town on a lake. The town surrounds the lakes. In that town, there were about 1,000 Jews at the time of the Second World War. But the town actually had a larger Jewish population before the Second World War and even before the First World War. Many Jews from Kastoria, like from every other place in the Ottoman Empire, had already emigrated to the United States. So there actually was a community of Kastorian Jews referred to as Kastorialis in the Ottoman style, or Kastorian in the Greek style. But there was a community in Brooklyn of Kastoriali Jewish people in New York who left relatives in Kastoria between the wars and lost relatives in the Second World War, in the Holocaust, in the Second World War. I lived in a neighborhood in Brooklyn of Sephardic people. We lived mostly among the Greek Jews. In the neighborhood in Brooklyn where I lived was mostly Greek Jews from Kastoria and Greek Jews from Yanina. The Greek Jews from Yanina were not really Ladino speaking, but the Kastoria Jews were Ladino speaking Jews. And my family had come from Salonika. And so it was easy for my grandfather to live among the Ladino speaking Jews in Brooklyn. And he was well known by everybody because he was the publisher of the Ladino newspaper in New York. But my introduction to the Holocaust was not about Kastoria. I really became involved with the Kastorian Society much later. And actually now I'm the president of the Kastoria Society, of the Hesed Ve'emet Kastoriali Society in Brooklyn, and really across the United States. But my grandfather was from Salonika. And of course, he lost relatives in the Holocaust in Salonika, but the story of Salonika was a very different story than that from Kastoria, because Kastoria was a small town and Salonika was a very big city. Kastoria had maybe 1,000 Jews at the opening of the Second World War, and Salonika had 55,000 Jews. It was a Jewish-dominated city on the eve of the Second World War. So I don't want to go into too much details. I'll probably get some questions about it, and it'll be easier to answer some questions later. So just one other thing, having the background from Salonika, I was introduced to the Holocaust by a doctor from Salonika, who was the doctor at the Sephardic Home for the Aged in Brooklyn, which was 100% occupied by Sephardic Jews from Greece and Turkey. And this doctor had been through Auschwitz, survived, and came to the United States after the war and wrote the first published account of a Holocaust survivor in 1945. And the book has been out of print since 1945, but I have just republished the book, annotated it, updated it with photographs and documents from Greece. And I'll give you some information later if anybody's interested in seeing the book. The book is called Birkenau, Auschwitz II, and it's a story of the Salonika Jews. But there were many Kastoria Jews in the Sephardic home too, and in Brooklyn. And of course, I got to know them all, and that's how I became connected to the Kastorian community.
Thank you so much. I mean, the film was so poignant. I'm sure everybody who's listening in nodding their heads right now. And of course, you all had this deeply personal connection to the film. So I might ask you sort of variations of the same question, but to Larry Confino, I will say, I think everybody would love to hear a little bit about your own connection to the community, to Kastoria and the Jewish community, and whether or not making the film, how that sort of changed how you felt about this community, whether or not this connection has grown deeper through the making of the film.
I'll start with the first question. So my grandfather came from the town around 1912, 1913, and came to the US. His wife was also from the town, and they married in New York in the early 20s. And so, you know, lucky for us that my immediate family was all here before World War II. It was only extended family that was in Kastoria, you know, during the war, during the period of time that we cover in the film. You know, I have to say, I mean, Larry and I went into this together thinking we're going to gather the oral histories, and that's the primary objective at first. You know, we've talked about this, that we sat at lunch and we looked at each other and we were like, if we don't do this, it's not going to happen. You know, if we don't go out and make an effort to gather at least the oral histories of all the survivors and other people who maybe have a recollection of the time, you know, the history is going to be lost. So, you know, it started out with, you know, I think I absorbed Larry's sense of responsibility about this. And then it felt like it was also my responsibility. Obviously, he had a much closer connection to the subject matter because of his parents and because they actually experienced the war. My family didn't. You know, my grandfather, for whatever reason, didn't talk about it. You know, so in the course of my childhood, I knew that there were people in the family that were survivors. I knew that Larry's mom was a survivor. I knew that Benny was a survivor. I was told by my grandfather not to ever ask them about it.
Wow.
You know, it's a topic that you don't, you know, whenever there was a family get together, I was aware that they had numbers on their arms, and I was curious, but I never asked because my grandfather told me not to. But through the course of making the film, that sort of vague knowledge that there were people who passed from my family who died in Auschwitz was really just theoretical. You know, it was people's names on on paper, you know, people on my tree where it said on the family tree died at this point in time. But it didn't really feel that real to me in terms of my own personal connection to it. But in traveling to the town many times, you know, I now feel like I have a much closer connection to that past. And that's, you know, it doesn't get much more meaningful than that. You know, that we had the opportunity together to capture this history and to really feel like there's you know, I'm Greek, you know, I have a Greek connection, that I have a Greek homeland, you know, that I have a Greek identity. I don't know that I felt that growing up. But, you know, when you go to the town and the people treat you like family, you start to feel like family. And this is coming, there's very little Jewish influence on the town other than Jack Eliyahu, who's in the film. But the people in the town, you know, were incredible in the times that we've been there. They're just super welcoming. So, you know, it was just an incredibly meaningful experience to have the opportunity. You know, very grateful to have the opportunity for us to be able to have done this.
And Larry Rousseau, is there anything you would want to add about the strengthening of your connection?
I used to hear stories about Kastoria, how beautiful it was, you know, whatever. And I think when I was a teenager, my parents sent me there one summer and I got to see it for like a day trip. And I couldn't really absorb it. I knew there was a lot more that I wasn't knowing. And just the experience over the last 10, 15 years has helped me understand that history much better. And I'm very grateful that we were able to do that.
And, you know, I to do what you did was sort of this sort of laser sharp focus on professionalism, great filmmaking, these wonderful oral histories, but yet your personal connection. And I was, you know, I think Larry Confino, when we were talking earlier, and I mentioned this sort of three-legged stool of who you are in approaching this material. You're documentarians, right? You're in there to tell the story, but you're also claimants, right? You want to claim this history that is yours. And you're also victims because you lost family, right? So you have these sort of, they're not opposing forces, but they're there. And I don't know whether you want to dig any further with this, or we can move on about what it was like to have these competing roles as you were creating the film.
Can I just say something about that?
I would love it.
Sure.
You know, most synagogues have Holocaust commemoration services. And I've always belonged to a Sephardic synagogue. And in the beginning, I didn't take part in the Holocaust commemorations because I never knew anyone in my family that died. It was my great-grandparents that died in the Holocaust. My grandfather had left his family there. So when I was in the synagogue, I didn't actively partake in the service. I didn't count myself as a child of a Holocaust survivor. But some of the Holocaust survivors would come to me and tell me, go up with all the children because you're a survivor too. And they would say to me, we're all survivors. We're here because somebody survived. And so we're all survivors. And it's, to me, it's very similar to what we do in the Passover service. When in the Haggadah for Passover, it says you have to count the Exodus from Egypt as if it happened to you. For Passover, you have to count it as if it happened to you. And the same is true for the Holocaust. We have to remember and teach it as if it happened to us. So that's one of the ways I got more involved with Holocaust commemorations also.
Thank you. Andrea,
Yes.
one of the, the archival footage in the film was, I have to confess, I don't know whether others who watched it, it took me a little bit into the film to actually have this eureka moment to realize the footage was not just great filmmakers finding footage that kind of met the story, that it actually was archival footage. So talk to us about how you came into this film footage, and this was your wonderful contribution to the film.
Yeah, the footage was taken by my great uncle, Baco Mayo, and his wife, Anna Mayo, when they went to Kastoria in 1937 in the spring. And they went to visit. They brought a professional photographer with them. There was very wealthy, well-to-do people at the time. They came from Kastoria around 1916 or earlier. And he was involved with women's clothing, became very, very wealthy, and he was a very big philanthropist. He is the one that funded that children's orphanage that you saw in the film, and the signage that the kids had. Thank you, America. Thank you, Baco Mayo and Anna Mayo. Anyhow, this footage was taken on their trip. They visited all the families. They were in the town. You saw the wedding scenes. Everything was real time, actual. They knew all the people that they were filming. And these reels of film remained with him in his possession till he and my great aunt passed away. And my father was like a son they never had. And he had all of this in the house where I grew up. And it was tucked away in a cedar closet in an air-conditioned house. So that meant whatever was there was really preserved very nicely. And when the fellas were working on the film, we talked, and they kept asking, is there anything you have available? Does your dad have this, that, and the other thing? Well, anyway, after my father passed away, I got my hands on all of this footage and brought it in, and Larry, they took it downtown to a film studio, and they had the technical people remaster it in whatever format, and the technical people were floored by the quality. It hadn't degraded to the point that it was useless. And they reworked a lot of the footage of what they had done to weave all of this new footage in with what they had. And it was just enormous and very, very emotional. And people got to see relatives that in motion, that Larry's grandparents and
I
Martin and
don't
Ryan's
need-
family. I mean, it just was mind blowing what happened from this. You can read, you can talk, you can take yourself in different places emotionally, but when you see it, and it's very, very special. And in the film, I have to say, I have a relationship with Lena before, my relationship with Lena predated Larry's relationship with Lena. When Lena came to America, she was very close with Anna and Bacomeo, and they had a house in Atlantic Beach. And Lena would visit on the weekends when they weren't working, and I would be there with my parents, and I fell in love with Lena. She was my Lena from the time I was just a baby. And that was it. And it was always like that, very, very close. So I have to honor my great aunt and uncle all the time. And Larry Confino speaks of his grandfather marrying a woman from Kastoria. The woman his grandfather married was my aunt, my father's sister. We're all in it together. And
Love it.
and it just, but the feelings like Joe talks about when you go to shul and you're having the services, once you get into these waters, it's in you, and all you want to do is share and keep the word going to save the memories and share the memories, because there's too much negativity that and the anti-Semitism now, as you said earlier, it's most unfortunate. So it's a big awakening for people to see this film. One of the uphill battles we had, which the fellows will correct me if I'm going out of turn here, was trying to get the posting of the film in the premiere station in New York, in the PBS. It was uphill work. A lot of this is uphill work in many places. And now that some of the doors are opening, we just, are so grateful that you're giving the opportunity and sharing this film across the country.
Well, I think our thanks are to you. A beautiful response. Thank you so much. And Larry Rousseau, again, the archival footage was so extraordinary. And I understand that you had an opportunity to restore the Sam Elias. Is that how we pronounce Elias?
Yes.
How we, to restore that film. Here we have a film with these two utterly personal family stories. Do you want to talk a little bit about that film footage?
Basically, Sam Elias was another cousin that was related to Martin Elias. Martin Elias was one of the executive producers on the film. He supported the film from the get-go, and it was a cheerleader for it. And he was given this footage that was in not nearly as the condition preserved like Andrew's footage. And this was back around, I guess it was 95 or 96. I don't remember exactly what year it was. And we took it to DuArt at the time. And we created an internegative of the print, because I knew that I wanted to save this in a format that would last. I didn't want to just save it on video because the technology, we didn't even have HD at the time. And I'm glad that I did. We made 3 versions of the internegative so that we knew we had it for the long run in good quality. And that was the initial footage that we had for the film archival until we managed to get in touch with Andrea, and then we had the full picture. And the other aspect about Andrea's footage is for stuff that was shot in the 1920s, 30s, it was color.
Some of it was color.
Some of it
Some-
was color.
Yeah.
It was remarkable.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's part of what the technicians at Technicolor were amazed by, because very few people at a consumer level had color. It was a brand new invention.
Color was post-war, the wedding.
My
Okay.
parents,
were
No,
black and
but
white.
there,
No,
but
my-
there's some footage that was early Kodachrome is what they told us at Technicolor. Anyway, we're getting very technical now.
and
But
that was,
yeah, bottom line is that was very, very unusual for a person from the general public to have that film. It was very, very expensive. So anyway, that's kind of a unique feature of what we have in the film. It's not just the wedding footage. It's footage of the marketplace and the town crier. There's footage that is color and is just amazing.
The town crier, we had just a couple of still images, and we're like, okay, this is good, we'll use this. And then when we were going through the footage, and we see him walking down the thing, Larry and I looked at each other. It's like, this is perfect. And
Oh,
also,
God.
of course, my grandparents, which I'd never seen any motion pictures of them before. I mean, there's a whole story. I saw it maybe when I was a kid, but then we didn't see it. And seeing them come to life. There was one image of them where they're all standing together. I had a still image of it. And in the film, that same moment is captured on film, moving. So it was like that picture that I grew up with of them being still came to life. It was
Incredible.
a wonderful thing.
Wow.
Well, let's just talk a little bit. Joe, I can turn to you to tell us just a little bit more about what life was like for the residents of Kastoria, particularly, after the town was occupied by the Italians, after Italy occupied, and then after 43 when the Nazis invaded. Can you just, share with us a little bit about what life was like living there during the war years?
I think Lena and Benny described it pretty well in the film.
Mhm.
And even Maurice described it also at one point. It was a small town. Everybody was friendly. They were in and out of each other's houses. It really is a small town. And the people knew each other. And they were friendly with each other. Completely different from a city like Salonika with 75,000 people, 55,000 Jews who were industrial, going back and forth to work with metropolitan transportation and buses and trolleys, and it was a completely different scene. Kastoria was a small town and everybody really loved each other. They were good to each other and they were friendly with each other and they helped each other. And the best way is to just watch the film and see the way Benny and Lena and some of their Greek friends describe their relationships. It's really true. If you go there now to Kastoria, they will treat you the same way. If you tell them that you came because you saw the film Trezoros, they will treat you as if you belong there, as if you're their friend.
Well, I want to probe just a little bit more with that, if I might. And Larry Russo, you went back, of course, for the dedication of the memorial, which was actually, for me, a very poignant part of the film. That's where I think, for me, I was crying. Talk a little bit about what it was like for you to be there and to see these townspeople who knew your family, right? And then I think just a follow-up question, who amongst them are still alive? I think that's a question that we had.
Unfortunately, we lost another one, Allegra Corman. Allegra Zakaria passed away just a few months ago. But Sally Elias, Sally and her sister are still alive. And I'm not sure, I think Moshe Mizrahi in Israel is still alive. But I'm not sure about the rest. That was actually one of the things that, you talk about challenges during the film is a lot of the people we were interviewing were elderly and we were losing them as we were trying to get a lot of the footage. And it was just stressful, to know that we were losing the people that were going to tell us these histories.
And what about seeing the non-Jewish residents who knew your family? What was that like?
Forgive me, I'm sorry.
What was it like to be with non-Jewish residents of the town who knew your family members?
What it was like to be with non-Jewish residents
So
who,
were there not people there who remembered your family when you went back, or am I misremembering in the film?
I mean, there were people that knew, but they were, you'll forgive me, I'm a bit
Well,
of a,
Nitsa's family came to the screening in Kastoria.
Nitsa's family.
And the bishop came to the screening in Kastoria. The metropolitan came, local townspeople came, and we have a friend in Kastoria, Anthony Papadamianos, who has really taken on the role of promoting the history of the Jews of Kastoria. He's working with us on creating a center for Jewish history in the town of Kastoria. He's collecting materials. He has interviewed many more people in Greek people from the town of Kastoria about what they remember about the war and their friends, and the situation, the occupation situation. We have started a friendship, an ongoing friendship with the Greek population of Kastoria, because there's only one Jewish person left in Kastorias, but we have a relation with the townspeople. In fact, at the time of the memorial, on Saturday every year, particular day of the Jewish memorial, the next day there's a memorial in a neighboring town for the Greeks that died at the hands of the Nazis. Very soon after the deportations.
So I think the difficult question I'm getting at here, and Joe, maybe you want to take this on, that do the residents in the town, do they bear any culpability for what happened to the Jews? And I know there's a question in the Q&A. I think we're all aware of the anti-Semitism in Greece, obviously at the time and today. So per capita, Greece lost more Jews than other countries, right? So
than any other country, that's true. But when you use the term culpability, I don't think the culpability in Kastoria was the same as you can say in the rest of the Holocaust in general.
Okay.
Yesterday somebody told me 5% of people went out of their way to save Jews, 90% of people did nothing, and 5% of the people went out of their way to help persecute the Jews. So 90% of the people doing nothing, that's one way to look at it. But, in this town, it was a small town and the people were unarmed. They had no support from the Greek army, which was a failure anyway at the hands of the Nazis. There was nothing they could do. Anti-Semitism, there is always anti-Semitism. There's anti-Semitism right here in our backyards. We face it every single day. Every Jew faces anti-Semitism in his lifetime and doesn't forget it. And there's always anti-Semitism. And even in the film, you saw one example how when Maurice came out of hiding, his brief hiding, somebody offered to help him and turned him over to the police, brought him to the Valhalla house.
Mm-hmm.
So culpability, there were other people that were willing to help him. And there were other people, Greeks, willing to help Jews that wouldn't even accept the help because they felt they couldn't abandon their families. So as helpless as the Jews were, the Greeks were also helpless at the hands of the Nazis. Kastoria didn't have a big Jewish population, it didn't have the big city atmosphere that Salonika had.
Mm-hmm.
Salonika had an organized corroborating force. There were Jewish police in Salonika. There were people who actively, openly corroborated with the Nazis against their own Jewish families. Some of that story is in the book that I've just published, this book, Birkenau, about Salonika, but you don't see that in Kastoria. It was a small town. There may have been people who took advantage of the situation after the deportations. And there may have been people who had their own particular anti-Semitic feelings for whatever, but you know, for everything you can say about someone who's anti-Semitic, there are plenty of Jews who hate other people just as much. So this is human nature. I don't think you can say this is actually a culpability situation in Kastoria. To me, it's not. To me, it was quite the opposite. If they could have hidden people, they would have, but it was even too small a town to hide people.
Yeah.
There was nowhere to hide.
Good.
We have a bunch of questions here I see in the Q&A. I don't know if some of them are they're asking about the 2,000-year-old history of the Jews and how they came 2,000 years ago. They're curious. Joe, do you want to fill that in a little bit about the Roman history?
Yes. Every city in Greece had a small Jewish population, maybe just a handful of families. So Kastoria also had a Roman Yod population, very small. The biggest Roman Yod Jewish population goes back in Greece more than 2,000 years. But that is mainly in Yanina, Greece. Yanina is the only city in Greece that was not overtaken by the Sephardic population that arrived after the expulsion from Spain, which you might even consider a sort of Holocaust anyway. Plenty of Jews were murdered if they didn't convert to Christianity, and the expulsion actually saved the lives of Jews who were allowed to leave. But most of the cities in Greece where there was a small ancient Jewish population, that ancient Jewish population actually folded into the Spanish Jewish community because they were overwhelmed by the numbers.
Mhm.
Kastoria was a Spanish Jewish city, but the Jews that came from Kastoria, the majority of the Jews in Kastoria had come from Spain, settled in Italy, and then moved from Italy to Kastoria together. It was an Italian Jewish community originally, but there was no Italian ritual in Greece. There were very small pockets of Italian ritual in Salonika. There were two small Italian communities, but they were actually Spanish Jews anyway, and their ritual was in Spanish, even though they called themselves Italian Jews. It was a history situation, but there was an ancient Jewish population in Greece over 2,000 years ago, and there is an exhibit in the Jewish Museum of Greece in Athens about that right now.
We would like to go.
I wish we could.
There are a number of questions. I think there's a lot of interest in the oral history. So let's just spend a little time talking about the oral histories, and then we'll definitely get to some of the other questions in the chat. So Larry Confino, tell us about the process of gathering the oral histories, if you will. And they were done so well. You were able to sort of carry out your questioning so respectfully without really eliciting painful. I mean, the memories were painful, but somehow the way it was done was just brilliant. So I'd love to hear your reflections on taking the oral histories, and how did you actually figure out where everybody was located to do this?
Well, we had an incredible researcher known as Lena Russo, because Lena was in touch with every survivor. So some of that, forensics of figuring out where people were and how to get in touch with them, we were extremely lucky because she knew where everybody was. And that also created a comfort zone, I think, for us. So, Larry and I sort of took turns shooting or doing the interviews. And, but, there was a comfort zone that was inherent because Lena made the introduction. So when we started, we were focusing on the Holocaust survivors, and we did those interviews in New York and Florida, and then we went to Greece and to Israel. Everybody was, for the most part, was very open. We were very lucky that the people were open about it because, some of this subject matter is, was still very raw and emotional for some of the people. Some people just wouldn't talk to us. There was a couple of people, Larry, there was like a couple of people, right, who just...
Yeah, there was the other Nitsa. She didn't want to talk on camera.
Right. No, but I'm talking about, there was a guy in Arizona also who's a survivor who didn't want to participate. There was a couple of people that didn't want to participate. So, but for the most part, because Lena made the introductions, at least I think, that created you know, a comfort for them that we're coming from her. You know, that this is Lena's emissaries that are coming to interview me, and I think that helped quite a bit.
Her two Larrys.
The two Larrys, right? The Larry squared.
Exactly.
And then, you know, beyond that, when we were in Greece on one of the trips, it might have been the second trip, where I was staying, the people said, you know, you need to meet Anthony Papadamianos. He lives a couple of doors down, and he grew up here, and he knows all of the people in the town. He's like the mayor of the town.
Mm.
He knows everybody who was around and can talk about this because he talks to everybody.
His
So
father was a priest in the town.
And his father was a priest in the town, right? So his name, he was a visible person because of that also. And he came to this Baccaris hotel one day, and I don't speak any Greek, but his English was pretty flawless because he lived in the US. And he immediately latched on to what we were doing and just said, I want to help you however I can. I'm going to connect you with all the residents of the town who were alive at the time. And so he single-handedly added a dimension to this that we wouldn't have had otherwise, because even people, you know, below a certain age didn't know who those elders were in the town. It was just because Anthony knew everybody that we were able to capture that. So we went on a trip, a special trip where we interviewed all of those people who were still in the town. And then even beyond that, there were people in America who had emigrated, who he connected us, you know, with them. But it created a kind of balance to the storytelling that we wouldn't have had otherwise. So we were very fortunate to have his involvement. Otherwise, I don't know how we would have found those people. You know, it's one of those things. We were just very lucky to connect with him.
Larry Rousseau, did you want to add anything? And there is a question about who is Lena. Larry, why don't you just explain who Lena is?
My mom, who's Lena?
Yeah.
That's a hard question to answer properly. She was the main character in the film. She was my mom. She was a very strong woman, very positive thinking woman. She always used to tell us never give up, and I try to stick to that mantra of hers. And you know, if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be here.
Maurice had something to do with it also, but yeah.
It's a question, why so few Jews returned after the war, and if we know how many returned to Salonika.
Well, first of all, so few returned to Kastoria because there were so few survivors.
Precisely.
Of the 1,000 or so survivors, of the 1,000 or so Jews that were deported from Kastoria, only 36 survived. I think it was 35 or 36. And of the 35 or 36, we know at least 4 that went back. That would be Jack Elias's father, Benny, and the two Sally Elias and her sister. And I'm sure there were 1 or 2 more that went back also, but couldn't stay there. It was unbearable for them to stay there. It was just too sad, if not too difficult. Compare that to a city like Salonika, which had 55,000 Jews on the eve of the war deported from Salonika to Auschwitz. And of the 55,000 that were deported, 1,200 survived.
Mm-hmm.
The 1,200 that survived and went back to Salonika, I would say almost all of them, nearly 1,000, later emigrated to the United States within 5 years, emigrated to the United States from Salonika. And so there was a very small portion of the community that stayed even in Salonika, which was a big city and where the Jewish community was organized and had property and was able to implement social services for those survivors who remained. It was a really difficult period after the war. Everybody had lost everything and nobody had anything. So they relied on the social services of what was left of the community with the help of the government, which couldn't be organized in the small towns like Kastoria and Bolos and Larissa, where there were just a handful of people that returned. Salonika was able to recover property and start to rebuild in that way. And part of that story is also in the book Birkenau that I've just republished, because the book was written by the president of the community after the war. So that's why so few returned to Kastoria. There were so few survivors.
Right. Talk a little bit about Ladino. I know there was a question in the chat, and I was curious as well. Did any of you grow up hearing Ladino, speaking Ladino, learning it? Okay.
Andrea, do you speak Ladino?
Very little, given the opportunity. I mean, there's nobody around really. And when we see each other, you know, that's when it bubbles up to the surface. And my heart is always warmed with the expressions. And, you know, every week the bulletin from the synagogue has a little something, you know, but.
So I grew up in a Spanish household because I lived in a two-family house. My family on one floor and my grandparents on the other floor. My grandfather was the publisher of the Ladino newspaper in New York.
Oh, wow.
But that predated me. The newspaper was already defunct by the time I was growing up. But I always heard Spanish, and I learned Spanish, and I took Spanish in school because it was a natural language for me. But I used to go home every day and say to my father and my grandfather, how do you say this in Ladino? How do you say that in Ladino? How would you say it differently? Why is it different? And that's how I learned Ladino. And I speak Ladino fluently. My father's family is from Turkey. My mother's family is from Salonika. So my father's family say, I speak like a Greek. I speak Ladino like a Greek. And my mother's family says, I speak Ladino like a Turk. And if you really want to know, I really speak Ladino like an American. And I've actually taught a Ladino class here in New York. And one of the things we did in the class was spend some time talking about the variations of Ladino. Ladino in Turkey, how it's different from Ladino in Greece, how it's different from Ladino in different cities, and different from Ladino in the United States.
So who in the town spoke Ladino in the war years?
Well, all the Jews spoke Ladino.
In the homes.
For 500 years from Spain, because they could not fully integrate into Greek or Turkish culture. The Jews were always separated as Jews. They could not become Muslim and they could not become Christian. So the Greeks spoke Greek, the Turks spoke Turkish, the Jews spoke Ladino, and everybody learned a second and third language. The Greeks spoke Turkish and Spanish, the Jews spoke Greek and Turkish, the Turks spoke Greek and Ladino, and that's true because that's the way they did business on 3 different levels. They did business with themselves and with each other. So they all spoke 3 languages at least.
Yeah.
Some of them actually later on, the Jews actually learned French because of the Alliance schools, but that's another different story.
Right.
How many languages did Lena speak, Larry?
French was her first language, actually. She learned in Salonika, Greek, Hebrew, English, a little bit of Italian, Yugoslavensky.
Wow.
So I guess it was 6.
And
Did I say
Ladino.
Hebrew?
You said Hebrew, yeah.
Yeah, 6.
And what about your dad? Could your dad speak multiple languages too?
Dad spoke Italian very well because he lived in Italy. He spoke Greek very well. That people used to say he's the guy at the restaurant. Whenever Dad would walk in and talk to him in Greek, the restaurant owner would tell me, "Your father speaks like a diplomat." He speaks Greek like a diplomat. So Greeks, Spanish, Ladino, Italian, English. I guess about 5 languages.
Hebrew.
I'll just chime in really quick, Judy. My parents spoke Ladino at home, because both sides of my family are from that area. And it was the code language, you know, like a lot of kids, you know, that was the language they spoke when they didn't want us to know what they were talking about.
Same
And
here.
so unfortunately, that has not been passed on to me. Maybe someday Joe will give me some Ladino lessons.
So no Yiddish.
No Yiddish, no.
Absolutely not.
Didn't-
No, that was one of the hardships for the Jews in the camp.
Yeah.
We
They
saw
didn't
that.
understand
Yeah.
German.
Right. That was the one language that never, yeah.
Well, and Lena says that in the film.
Right.
They didn't believe that she was Jewish because
Right.
she was not speaking Yiddish.
Larry Russo, there is a question that I'll just pose to you from the Q&A. Somebody wants to just know a little bit more about your father and your uncle and their post-war attitudes, and the idea, this fact, and you know, we hear it time and time again from next generation that their parents wouldn't talk about it. So someone's just asking you just to explain, you know, describe a little bit more about that.
As far as
Also, because Lena and Benny were so forthcoming in the interview.
you know, when I was younger, somebody also asked a question about whether my father had spoken about the war, and he didn't. And he died years ago in 1988, and I never got a chance to ask him things about the war because I didn't even know what questions to ask at that time. It was too young. And really, even my mom didn't speak about, my uncle didn't speak about, my Aunt Nina didn't speak about it until 1996, I think, was when Schindler's List came out.
Mm-hmm.
And Schindler's List changed the landscape, because a large part of it, when I would ask my mom about it, they would say, you know, the stories were so horrific, most people that she felt wouldn't even believe her. So it wasn't until it became part of the greater conscience through films like Schindler's List that they felt, okay, now I can tell the story because people won't think that I'm just nuts. So I guess that would be my, there was one question that somebody asked about if they can still see the film, and I clicked on the wrong button, and I think I deleted it. But are they still able to watch the film on your platform?
They
Okay.
aren't, but we could leave it open if you would like us to.
Well, I'll let you know in case anybody wants to see it or recommend it. It's still playing it through the Los Angeles Greek Film Festival. They're showing it for 10 days starting today.
Perfect.
So if you go to the Los Angeles Greek Film Festival website, it's there along with a series of many other Greek Jewish themed films, along with other things. So if you want to watch it for the next week, you can watch it for free through there.
Perfect.
Or they can actually buy a disc.
There are a number of questions I'd love to get. We're approaching the hour, but if everybody's willing, we'll just keep going a few more minutes until
Fine.
you're all like sitting there going, okay, it really is our bedtime, and that we would understand.
No, it's fine. It's not that late.
It's not that, it's true.
Yeah.
So there is a question. You know, I assume for some of the people you interviewed, it was really this opportunity they might not have had before to speak out. Of course, they were elderly, not, you know, they might not have lived much longer after the interview, but did anyone sort of continue to speak out? Was anyone, you know, we have a speakers bureau at the museum where when there were survivors well enough to be speaking, they were the ones who were speaking to schools and libraries, etc. So did anyone continue to tell their story after you elicited it?
I don't know of anybody, Larry, that actually did that kind of educational.
Lena did.
Lena, I'm saying, aside
Lena
from
went with
Lena.
us to Washington.
Right, no, I'm not talking about
Went to
that.
many showings of the film.
Yeah, no, I'm not talking about her. I'm talking
great.
about people other than her.
Well, I do know some people that, you know, back in the 90s, I had arranged a photo exhibit on the Holocaust in Greece in Forest Hills at the Sephardic Jewish Center in Forest Hills. And we interviewed about 20 survivors on videotape. I still have those interviews. And I actually just been communicating with the Museum of Jewish Heritage downtown about sharing interviews of people that we have both interviewed. But some of those survivors actually did go on to teach, and that was Diamond Hooley from Salonika, Isaac Gerson, Nissim Al-Hadez. They did visit museums and did speak about their experience in the late 1990s. They were a little younger at that time, and unfortunately now most of the survivors now, if they're alive, are in their late 90s now. So it's not as easy and it's not as prevalent.
Are there any survivors who are still living?
There are a
From-
few, very few. Very few that I know in New York, but most of them are too old to participate in anything now, or, the two survivors I know in New York now are in their late 90s and unable. I think in Israel I definitely know one of Dr. Menashe's nephews is alive. He's 95. He's living in Israel now. He also says he can't do it anymore. He's alert and healthy, but he's not willing to talk about it beyond his family now. I do email with him. But
Don't
it's
you have some
becoming more
questions?
difficult.
So there is a question, I love asking this question. What do you wish you could have asked your relatives who you didn't get a chance to ask questions? So you're all involved in the making of the film. You lost family before the film was made. What are the questions you wish you could have asked?
I could kick myself every day. I could kick myself every day for not asking more questions when I had the opportunity. But we were young also. The survivors didn't want to talk about it when we were young. They wanted to live their lives. They wanted to be normal. They had gone through the most dehumanizing, degrading situation not even imaginable. They had to live a normal life. They didn't want to talk about it when we were young. As we got older, we forced them to talk about it. And, it was difficult for them. I remember asking my grandfather questions about his mother and his grandmother, and he started to cry. And here I am, a 15-year-old kid, making my 75-year-old grandfather cry.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to talk to him after that. But I could kick myself every day for not asking more questions.
I used to take for granted that, because mom lived until 95, and I had the luxury of, whenever a question came up when we were working on the project, or just there was a question that I wanted to know, I'd ask mom. And mom was, she took a good history of things, and she'd give me good answers. And when she passed away, that was lost, and then like Joe says, I can kick myself almost every day. I was like, oh, I should have asked her this, or I should have asked her that. But, it is what it is.
Yeah.
People are asking for your book. So we will, when we put the recording of the event up, we will be sure to put Joe's book, the title and the exact title and information about it in.
I put it in the chat.
it. Okay, perfect. You beat me.
I can send you one also.
Great. Talk a little bit about how religious were the Jews of Kastoria? Were they Orthodox? Were they traditional?
I think it was a spectrum. I don't think everybody was the same. Some people were definitely more religious. I know that my grandparents, my mom always used to say about her dad Kalev that he was more liberal. He was more Americanized and more modern. But I know there were many other families that were much more strict. So I think it varied.
Sephardic Jews don't adhere to that categorization of Orthodox, conservative, reform, and so forth. We're Sephardic, we say we're Sephardic, and it's a tolerant branch of Judaism. It's a practical, tolerant branch of Judaism, and that comes from the rabbinical literature of the Sephardic rabbis. And we didn't have to categorize ourselves that way because we weren't put in that position. The Greek Orthodox respected the Jew respected the Greek Orthodox and the Muslim. The Turkish Muslim respected other religions. We have the same God. It's just a different manifestation of prayer and recognition. But we're all God's children, and I think they treated each other that way by and large.
He was a practical.
There's a story in the movie, right in Trezoros. It says, Lena said, they used to come to light our candles, and on Shabbat, and we would go to their houses to light their fires on Easter. It's right in the film, they respected each other and they helped each other.
did they keep, and obviously people had different levels of observance. People kept kosher. Did your families keep kosher, for example, or?
I believe so. Yeah, they didn't. I mean, you know, in the concentration camp, they ate whatever food was available.
Of course.
And they say that, but you know, certainly the Jews didn't eat pork. They didn't eat non-kosher food when it was available and a way of life for them. They didn't do that, and nobody ever forced it on them. Why would they?
Right, right. Someone's just asking another Ladino question. Joe, I think you can answer this quickly, that they have always heard that the term Judeo-Espanol was the preferred term for Ladino. Is that true, or?
Yes, but let me just say one more thing. You know, in Salonika, when you ask about religion, how religious they were, in Salonika, until the Greek population took over the city from the Turks, 1912, the port in Salonika was closed on Saturday because the Jews would not work. The Jews did not work on Saturday. And Orthodox Christians had their Sabbath on Sunday, but the port and the stores were closed on Saturday. In the 20s, when the Greeks redesigned the laws, the Sabbath became Sunday, and the rabbis told the Jews, if you must work on Saturday, you can work in the afternoon after you go to pray in the morning. If you must, you can. So it was always a liberal form of Judaism. But now to the question about Ladino. Ladino is a widely used term nowadays, 21st century especially, for the language of the Spanish Jews. When I was growing up, I was always aware of the term Ladino because my grandfather was a publisher. And Ladino was the term for Hebrew literature in Spanish. It's the term for the Hebrew Bible in Spanish, for the Haggadah in Spanish, because it has Hebrew syntax. And that's what Ladino was originally, Spanish with Hebrew syntax from the Bible. The Spanish we spoke at home was Spanish. My grandmother used to tell me, you have to learn Spanish. She used to tell me that. She would speak to me in Spanish. I answered her in English, and she would say to me, "Cale empezar en español." You have to learn Spanish. You know, distinguish that from the Spanish I was learning in school. So people would call it Judeo-Spanish because they were scholars studying the dialect. So they had to give the name to a dialect. So they called it Judeo-Spanish. There were some scholars in New York who used to use the term Judesmo, but Judesmo does not mean the language. Judesmo means Judaism, or it would be the equivalent of Yiddishkeit to an Ashkenazi. I never heard the term Judesmo used until an Ashkenazi scholar pinned that on us. And the Ashkenazis pinned all kinds of labels on us. If you ask what is Sephardic now in Israel, it includes Moroccans, Tunisians, Algerians, Egyptians. Everybody is Sephardic now who's not Yiddish, who's not German and Polish and Russian. But that's because it was a label pinned on us by Ashkenazi. In the old days, Sephardic people, where I grew up in Brooklyn, Sephardic people were Spanish Jews. The Syrians never said they were Sephardic when I was growing up. They said they were Syrian Jews. Only after the 6-Day War, when you had the influx of all other non-Ashkenazi Jews into Israel, that the Ashkenazim pinned that label on everybody who wasn't Polish, German, or Russian. So yes, you could call it Spanish, you could call it Judeo-Spanish, you could even call it Ladino, which is the most popular term now, distinguishing it.
Thank you. Maybe just spend a couple of minutes on, I wouldn't call it the technical aspects of making the film, but certainly the editing process. And you have, I'm sure you had, I don't know how many hours, if you want to tell us how many hours of interviews you actually had. And, you know, were there
How many years?
years?
Years, hours, yes.
Were
There's
there,
over 50 hours of interviews, let's put it that way.
were there things that you heard in the interview that, and perhaps you don't even necessarily want to share them with us, but that you heard that you'll never forget, that you know you couldn't use in the film?
There's a ton of things that didn't make it into the film. You know, at a certain point, that becomes a very difficult choice. You know,
Talk a bit about
there's
it.
probably a half an hour of really good stories about various things that just didn't fit into the narrative. And, you know, at a certain point, you can't expect people to watch 2 hours plus of this kind of a story. So we have to make those hard decisions.
I don't know. We're getting so many,
I mean,
Oh, there's very little Ladino in the film. Very little Ladino.
right, because people were not speaking Ladino in the film. For them, I mean, Joe, people didn't really speak to us in Ladino during the interviews, so you know we didn't have a lot to include.
No, we were able to get Sally to sing the Palestina song in Ladino.
Right.
And the Rabbi Shani sang Sephardic Ladino style music at the wedding and Ladino songs for some of the music.
Right. Rabbi Shani added a lot of atmosphere. I mean, that was a tremendous thing. I mean, just as long as we're on that topic, Judy, one of the things that we decided to do was we asked a rabbi that we met through Joe if he could make believe that he was a rabbi in Greece, in Kastoria, at that time. What would he sing? Could he sing in the style of that time? Because we couldn't find any authentic recordings that existed. So we took the rabbi into a studio and he sang. And we used that. You know, when we have an image of the synagogue and you hear him singing, and you know what we felt was, well, what would it be like to be standing outside the synagogue when a service was happening? And we told him that. So he sang a particular song that he thought would have been appropriate for us to hear if we were standing outside the building. We also took Danny Elias and Maurice Sadaka, who were musicians who know the catalog, as we say, you know, who knew the Sephardic catalog because they've been performing it live for years. We also took them into the studio and we created Underscore because there wasn't necessarily existing music that would fit underneath all of the interviews. We thought whatever existed was going to be too competitive with the interview material. So they came in and they played these melodies beautifully. And so we used that, you know, we were always searching for a way to make it more authentic. How can we make this more authentic? And that was a great challenge, you know, between the visuals and the music and whatever we were able to locate. That was very important. So I'm not sure if we answered your question, though.
Absolutely. And you and I were talking earlier, you know, you also spoke about this sense of urgency, right? I mean, I'm sure that in creating this film and doing these interviews and seeing the ages of the people you were interviewing, it must have just become even more of a necessity to get these interviews done. And where are the interviews housed somewhere? Where is the raw footage and the interviews? Are they?
Well, I have copies of it, and Larry Russo has copies of all the original material.
It's all on the
It's all digital.
Great.
It's all, you know, it was all, except for the archival material, everything was shot on a digital format.
Great.
We didn't really even shoot.
Although-
We shot a little bit of tape.
There
but-
was some analog video and the Super 8 film that I shot.
Right. No, I would consider that to be an archival source. I mean, what you shot is still an archival source. But anyway, there's a lot of interesting interview material that we were not able to use. Look, some of the more memorable things that we were told, Larry and I went to his mom's house because she had an archive. I told you about this. She had an archive of photographs that people had given her over the years once she came to the US. And we sat in her kitchen and we scanned a lot of the photographs that you're seeing in the film, came directly from her. And she told us a couple of things that I wish she would have said when we were interviewing her, you know, where she was talking about how she said, wait a second, here's a photograph of me. I went to a party in must have been the early 50s, right, Larry? Sometime in the early 50s. That picture of her dancing. There's a photograph that we didn't use in the film where she's dancing and she says, I want to tell you about this photograph. And she said, somebody came up to me right after that picture was taken and said,
Oh, how
Lena,
can you be happy?
how can,
Right.
yeah, how can you dance? How
That
can you
was, yeah, that
sing?
was,
And
Friedman.
how can you want to tell the rest of this, Larry? Because that was something that I'll never
Yeah,
forget.
you go ahead, please.
And you know, what she said back to the woman was, first of all, I lost my whole family. And if anything, I'm going to celebrate life because I was lucky enough to actually to survive. So I want to celebrate every day that I live, that I'm alive. Also, she said to the woman, would you want to spend any time with me if all I did was talk about all the tragedy and all the horrible things that I experienced? Would you want to spend any time? I don't want to be that person. You know, I want to be a person that is positive. And, you know, Larry experienced this firsthand. I experienced it in the course of the making of the film. You could not find a lighter person, at least to me. When I felt like I was in her presence, I felt like this is such an inspirational person. I can't even describe how inspirational she was. And those are the things that stick in my mind about that are outside of the interviews, were the things that she told us that were, you know, to me, a guiding light in terms of how to live, despite whatever has happening to you. You really have, you know, you have to celebrate life. You have to enjoy life. You have to enjoy family and love what you have and be grateful. And, you know, that was incredibly inspirational to me. She wasn't my mom. You know, Larry was lucky. He had this incredible influence. But, you know, some of the things outside of the interviews were really meaningful. And anybody who's even thinking about this, who may be listening, don't waste any time. Go interview the elder people in your family. It's just such a great experience, and it's so valuable. I can't stress that enough.
You know, in the film also, Benny says the same thing. When he went back to Kastoria and he started to meet his friends and they were so nice to him, and he started to work again and got the mill going and started planting. And he says, life came back.
Right.
You know, it's the way he said it. Life came back.
Yep,
Right.
I remember that very well.
Yeah, it's just, yeah, in those few words, he said a lot with those few words.
The addendum, Larry, to what you're saying, we have a survivor in our community who passed away in 2018. And just to paraphrase what you said and what she would say, I may be crying all day, but I'm going to go dancing at night.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It was her revenge. Living was, of course, living this life that
A
she
full life.
was the revenge on the Nazis.
Wow. Yeah.
Any last questions from our audience? Put it in the Q&A. If not, I just really want to thank you so much. We will, for everyone listening in, this program was recorded. I believe you're going to get an email with the link, but it will be on our website tomorrow or the next day. We will also, just in case you didn't catch Joe's book, we'll make sure we send that out, and we'll send out where you can watch the film. I just want to thank all of you profusely for sharing your time with us and this magnificent film. As you could see in the chat, it's just filled with people extremely moved, as I was, to be able to watch this film, particularly this week, International Holocaust Remembrance Day being today. It's really important that we keep the memory in our mind and honor our survivors. And I can think of no better way to have done that today than with this film. So profuse thanks to all of you. Thank you everyone for joining us from everywhere, and we look forward to seeing you at our next program.
Thank you, Judy. We
Thank
really
you so
appreciate
much.
the
Thank you
opportunity.
very, very much.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Good night.